Perfect. Yeah, never fails. Thank you very much. I know this is going to be a source of a great discussion, and it took me a second to come on board, so I know everybody thinks I probably just fell off the earth, but what I was really doing was trying to get you to quiver in anticipation. So, hi, everybody. Welcome to Stratosphere Lounge, episode 167. Once again, the Ustream is acting up, but there it is. What can you do? What can you do? Nothing. You can't do anything. There is no mercy and there is no surrender. It's been an interesting couple of weeks here at Lake Wobegon. We were busy last week. Oh, yeah, trying to work on the airplane, I remember. And we still have some work to do on that. But Monday, I got a chance to go down to San Diego. And technically Sunday night. Monday, I got a harbor tour with a 3-star admiral. And then after that, we got on board a big UH-60 helicopter and helicoptered out to USS Spruance, DDG 111. And I probably spent, I guess, about 3 hours out at sea on board a guided missile destroyer, and I'm sure I'll do a firewall about that directly. Once again, an absolutely astonishing experience. It's just so... first of all, it's just so unspeakably cool. I remember when I did it on the sub a while ago, and just being underwater was great and all that. But I remember there were elements of the sub that just seemed like they were more real world than what I'd seen in the movies. Pasadena's a fairly old boat, but on board Spruance, you walk into the CIC and it's really like Star Trek. It's absolutely amazing. It's just so cool. Very dark, lots of screens. We had a chance to see, they scrubbed the sensitive stuff off of there, but we got a chance to see the Aegis system at work, which probably didn't mean much to the rest of the people there, but I knew what was going on. And they did a simulated missile test, and here come all these red diamonds. And I can say boat, ASAP's retreat, because submarines are boats. It was just fantastic. It's absolutely amazing. We did something I think they call I think it was called a smashdown. I'll double check it. Basically, we were cruising along at 10 knots or so, just having a nice old time. Got down to about 8 knots while we were below decks having lunch and so on. But at the beginning of the tour, when we met the captain in the officers' quarters, we were just talking about all kinds of things. Somebody indelicately asked about the recent collisions and so on, and he talked about what caused that very honestly, I thought, and candidly. And then I said, and somebody said, how long does it take to stop those things? And I said, for a tanker or a container ship, it's miles and miles and miles. And the skipper said, yeah, that's exactly right. For our ship, I can stop in 2.5 ship lengths. I'm sorry? 2.5 miles? No, 2.5 ship lengths. I can stop the ship from flank speed. I just didn't believe it. None of us believed it. He said, yeah, it's an exercise we do called a crashdown sometimes. And, we do it every now and then. Not going to be doing it today. But it's pretty impressive. And turns out the... Arleigh Burke is a twin-screw destroyer, and what they do, normally if you had to reverse engines, these on Arleigh Burke are gas turbine engines, they're jet engines, they only go in one direction. But in the olden days, as you probably remember from your Titanic movies and so on, if you wanted to stop the ship, you basically had to throw the engines into reverse, and then the props would spin backwards, and off you go. But much like on an aircraft, the Arleigh Burke class destroyers have variable pitch props, which means that the props moving I don't know if it's a constant speed prop. That's an interesting question, but I bet it's pretty nearly. And they just basically increase the pitch on the propeller blades, which increases the bite, basically. And the bite increases the amount of water it's displaced, and that's your thrust and so on. So the interesting thing about the Arleigh Burkes is they can have their engines running at flank speed, and in the space of, I don't know, 3 or 4 seconds, something like that, no more than 10, they can reverse the pitch on the propeller blades so that the propeller blades are now actually providing thrust forward rather than backwards. It sounded like a really cool thing to do, and I was sorry we weren't going to get a chance to see it. And then I heard somebody say, the executive officer was giving the tour of the ship, and I heard him acknowledge something about a crash down exercise in 20 minutes or something. I said, did I hear that correctly? He says, yeah, the captain figures he didn't believe him and kind of called him out on it. So we're gonna do one. So we did one, and I was out there on the bridge wings. I'll just back up for a second and say that when I first got aboard the ship, flew in. The Arleigh Burke is much bigger than it appears to be. I saw them sailing out of. There was one tied up next to Iowa when Natasha and I went to Catalina Island, and it looked to me to be most of the size of the Iowa class battleship. It's a big ship. But when I got to the foredeck, and we're looking back over, from the bow, looking aft over the kind of the big square superstructure with the Aegis phaser radars out there, and in front of us is the vertical launch tubes. And on top of that is the superstructure, and on top of that is the flag, and it just was so impressive. It's just so impressive. I just said, she's just beautiful. And one of the young ensigns who was with us, who's the ship's public affairs officer, she said, no, she really is. And young woman, she's probably, I don't know, she looked like she was 20, 21, something like that. I just wanted to say that because your first impression of this vessel is it's just a beautiful thing to see. It's just gorgeous. Anyway, we got up to the bridge. The captain was about to begin this maneuver, and it was funny because the person who was at the actual helm was a young woman. She appeared to be very nearsighted. She was wearing very thick round glasses. I don't think she was over 21, and she was on that rudder, and she held that thing to within, a tenth or 2/10 of a degree. She was just terrific. So they said, yeah, you should probably step outside for this. So as we were coming in for the crash down, just as we were leaving the front deck, we were given a tour of the 5-inch gun up in the front, and I could feel us accelerating. You could see the water was going. You start to get a little bit of a breeze, somewhere around 12 or 15 knots. It's really pretty noticeable by that point. And we get in there, and by the time we're ready to go, and we get out to the bridge wings, just out on either side of the bridge, outdoors, we're moving. We were probably doing 30, 31, 32 knots. That's a pretty decent clip. Glass smooth water, and Arleigh Burke's just going through it like butter. It's just that ship was just as happy as it could be. 30 knots is a pretty good clip for a vessel that size. And sure enough, he does the crash down, reverses the pitch on the props, and it's not as dramatic as you maybe think it is. It's not like a whoa, but you can feel yourself slowing down, and you, by God, do stop within 2.5 lengths. And the thing that was so amazing about this, and this will be in this firewall I'll do about it hopefully next week, was that when the Pacific, just we were, I don't know, probably 20 miles off the coast of, a little more than that, off the coast of San Diego. But the Pacific is an unbelievable blue. It's the color of the shirt I'm wearing. It's just this perfect, beautiful blue. And when they put the propellers into reverse pitch, it basically was cavitating out because they were cranking the thing, and basically it created this foam with an awful lot of air in the water. It was just this sort of foamy mix, and since the ship was going backwards, and not only did it stop, it started to go backwards. It churned up what would normally have been the wake. I hope that makes sense. Like a big wake that's blown forward by the reverse propellers, and the color of that wake, that turquoise, was the most beautiful color I think I've ever seen in my life. It was just unbelievable, and that's why I have the job I have, because I can talk to somebody about a Standard 3 missile as a intercontinental ballistic missile defense system, and I can also talk about the fact that that turquoise water was the most beautiful color I've ever seen. It was astonishing. One of the things that struck me the most, in fact, the thing that did strike me the most and struck me the most last time I was at sea on board Pasadena is just, first of all, how young the crew is and how professional they are, and how happy they certainly seemed. We had lunch in the enlisted mess, and the place, it was an early lunch shift and a late lunch shift, but the early shift, everybody was smiling and happy, and once again, people from every possible race on the face of the planet were in there in large numbers. It was the most culturally diverse group of people I've ever seen, and everybody's happy and everybody's getting along, and everybody is respectful and friendly and professional. Very respectful, very friendly, and very, very professional. I sat down with two guys. One of them was a young Asian guy, I think of Japanese ancestry. He wants to get into IT. He's got another 2 years on board. The second he gets out of there, he's going to get snapped up. I told him, buddy, just the fact that you can get up and show up for work at the same time every day makes you a gold mine. Now you're not going to have any problem at all. I'd hire a vet in a heartbeat. And if there's any of you out there who are in LA or the LA area, veterans, and have any skills with media, for God's sakes, let us know at info@billwhittle.com. That said, another person who sat down there was a young guy, a little bit older, probably mid 20s, maybe heading into late 20s. And the story of this fellow was unbelievable. He was a high school football player, and the school that he was going to was a technical school, and the school was so short of funds and resources that they had to, the school's football team had to practice in public parks. And much like my baseball team, their first year they went 0-10, and they went 0-10 because they didn't have one of the reasons, they didn't have their own field. They just didn't have a field. So think about that. You have a football season, and every single game is an away game. Every single one is an away game. No home field advantage ever. And I asked this guy what he wanted to do when he got out, and he said he wanted to go back and coach football. And he told me this story, and then they went to 10-0, and they did it with. They did it just with pure heart, just heart. And I was so impressed by this young man. I was so impressed by him. He wants to go back, and he says he wants to be a football coach, and he I'm sure he'll be a fine football coach. I know he'll be a fine football coach. But the thing that impressed me the most was not only his air, but the fact that he was aware of the fact that one of the first things he has to do is not so much teach people about football as teach them about life. He's gonna take a lot of fatherless boys out there, and he's gonna straighten them out. He's very enthusiastic, extremely charming and wonderful guy, and I enjoyed talking to him enormously. So Yeah, every time I go out there, I realize that the generalizations I make about millennials are just plain that, just generalizations. They're the millennials that I get to see. The ones I don't get to see are out there right now. They're right at this second. They're out all around the world doing an amazing job, and I just couldn't have been prouder of my country or of them. I talked about this on my Right Angle show for the week, which I don't think has been released yet. It will be out tomorrow or the next day. But one of the things that struck me the most, I had a really, not only did it look, just getting in a Seahawk helicopter, putting on the helmet and trotting out there, just that alone was pretty damn cool. But before that, I got a chance to take a tour of San Diego Bay with a 3-star admiral. And the coolest part of that is you're in a little launch. I suppose it's a pinnace. But in any event, it was, a former drug boat with a nice little canopy in the back and room for maybe 7, 8, 10 people to sit down in the back. And this admiral was I can't tell you how much I learned from this guy. He's a 3-star admiral. He's commander of SurfPac, Surface Forces in the Pacific. Every single surface a vessel in the Pacific belongs to him. And we're just cruising along San Diego Harbor. And on 2 occasions, we passed large warships. One was an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, and the other one was even bigger. It's one of the new classes of amphibious ships with kind of those twin things up there. A huge ship. And what I did not know until then was that when a 3-star goes by, everybody who's on the deck immediately has to go to the rail where the admiral is and just come to attention and just stand there and salute until he, I guess it was his adjutant, throws a salute back, and then they can go back to work. But it was just that alone was pretty impressive. And I saw some things that were very impressive, and I saw some things that were very disturbing. I didn't mention in the Right Angle show that one of the things I did get to see was USS Zumwalt, DDG 1000. Zumwalt is the new class of destroyers. It doesn't look like anything else the Navy's ever built. It's just configured completely for stealth. It's just a slab-sided thing that just looks like, I don't know, doesn't look like anything that I've ever seen before. It's got that. It's got a bow where the lower part of the bow is forward, so it's got that kind of USS Virginia look, from the battle between the Monitor and the Virginia. And you'll notice I didn't say Merrimack. Those of you in the know, but it was just cool. And he said that ship can do so many things, and it's just a shame he can't talk about any of them. But here's the part that was. Oh yeah, David, I saw Zumwalt. She was right there. I was, I don't know, 200 yards, 300 yards away from her, something like that, maybe a little bit more. Yes, passing honors. That's right, Ohio. So anyway, here's what I learned from this 3-star admiral. And by the way, I thought this guy, when we were waiting for him, I thought he was going to be one of these silver-haired kind of, guy looks like an admiral. Somebody who looks kind of like, Spencer Tracy or something like that. He was very young, very fit. He struck, and extremely enthusiastic. And he struck me as the kind of guy who would, and I certainly do not mean this in any demeaning way whatsoever, but he came across like he was a high school football coach. Let me just get, I can't believe I've forgotten his name. I'll know it when I see it. Hang on a second. He's a visionary, by the way. Absolute visionary. Where is it? Here it comes. Hang on a second. Leadership. I hate these moments. That's him, Vice Admiral Rowden. You could just tell, and you knew within the first 3 or 4 minutes of listening to him talk that he wasn't just an admiral, he was, and is, a visionary. I mean, he's written an awful lot of the budgets for the Navy and a lot of the war plans for the Navy. And he was a mighty impressive guy. Impressive guy. So Admiral Rowden was talking about two things that I found very, very interesting. One of them good and one of them bad. The bad one, and it's pretty bad. Again, I covered this in the right angle, but here we are. Was that he had a large number of very expensive warships that were in dock or dry dock, awaiting repairs, and were not at sea because the repairs were taking far, far, far longer than they needed to. And I was disturbed by this because one of the things they told me right away was that in the peak of the Reagan years, we had a 600-ship Navy, 594 in 1987, 594 ships. And out of 594 ships in the U.S. Navy, we had about 100 deployed at sea at any given time. Nowadays, we have still have 100 ships deployed at any given time out of a Navy of 270 ships. So you can see that we're almost half of them are out at sea, and the rest of them come in for their repair and refit. But it doesn't happen nearly as fast as it could happen because the Navy turned all of these repair and refit operations over to the private sector, which you would think I would be a big fan of, and so far so good. But two things I learned from this admiral, many things I learned from this admiral, but two of them are, I'm not entirely convinced that the private sector is better for everything, because the Navy had extensive repair facilities which are still sitting there in San Diego, just empty, just vacant. And so that was one thing. And the other thing that I had not considered before was the positive side of cost plus procurement. You've heard me very critical of cost plus in terms of weapon systems, driving up the cost and the price of the weapon systems. But here's something I didn't know, and perhaps you didn't know it either. It's not that the Navy doesn't have enough money, and it's not that it doesn't have enough personnel. It's capacity. There is not enough capacity in terms of the civilians necessary to turn these ships around in a timely fashion. And the reason that there's not enough capacity is because our Congress cannot pass a budget. And this is the Congress is supposed to do two things, right? Pass a budget and defend the country. That's pretty much it. So what he was saying is, we try to get into a contract with a private company, and we tell them what we expect to be able to spend, but we can't guarantee it. It's not really a contract. He says everything's done on continuing resolutions. Maybe we have a year, maybe 6 months. Sometimes we have a 3-month continuing resolution, and we cannot make contracts beyond that point because we don't know how much money we're going to have. It's disgraceful. It's absolutely disgraceful and shameful, you know. And the result is that the private companies accept a contract for the total amount of work, but since they don't know how much money they're going to be getting, they put on the smallest work crew that they can and still essentially fulfill what they said. So in other words, if it was a cost plus style contract with the maintenance company, you would get the benefits of cost plus, which are, I think, terribly detrimental when you're buying something. But in this case, what he basically said was, look, if it's cost plus, they can hire as many civilians as they want to. And if it turns out that we have a budget shrinkage next time, well, then they just lay them off. But they're not negative. They're not in the hole. If they were to staff up now and we can't come up with the money next quarter or next year or whatever, then they're out of luck. So basically what's happening is the Navy is keeping in port very expensive and very scarce warships that are staffed and ready to go. They're just in there too long. And I asked him about this pipeline, and basically he said, this is something I think that could be ratified. He didn't say this. I said this. I said, this seems to me that he needs more ships. And it seemed to me that this would be the place where you could open up the bottleneck the fastest. I mean, you could just basically do that. And by the way, I want to be very clear on this. This admiral was not saying we don't have enough money. He wasn't saying that at all. I'm sure he thinks he didn't have enough money, but that's not what he was saying. He wasn't saying we don't have enough money. He was saying that the way we spend that money is so ruditude and amateur and unpredictable and ridiculous that he couldn't get into long-term agreements to get what he needs. And that's not good. Talking about building capacity, this is because building capacity is a whole different thing. It would take 15 years to build a fleet of any size. If we decided we wanted to do something completely different, and if we were in real trouble and we went to the wall, assuming we didn't add capacity, but I don't know if you can, we could probably build, I think he said we can probably do, this might have been the captain actually of the Esperance, I don't remember. I think it was the admiral. He said we can probably build 2 or 3 of these Arleigh Burke destroyers a year. He said the Chinese are building 10 or 12 of them a year, and they're brand new. And that's alarming. The night before I went out with went around the block with the admiral, I had a chance to have a very small dinner with a guy who was a former commander of one of the fighter squadrons on board aircraft carriers deployed. He commanded the entire squadron. And he was talking about something that I had not fully realized. I know our friend Vipercheck's going to back this one up to the gills. They were talking about the shape, the condition of our combat aircraft fleet. Now, needless to say, at any given time, there are aircraft that are down for repairs and for maintenance and so on. And if the thing's a real buggy bird or taking some damage, just put it out there for parts. But, and needless to say, we want our most reliable aircraft out on the fleet. But if you take someplace like Naval Air Station Lemoore up in mid-California, they have a large number of F-18s there, and the number of those aircraft that are flyable is probably about half. About half of them are flyable. That's just not good. It's not good at all. And the squadron commander was telling me how we found ourselves in that position. Now, again, my friend Foghorn will probably have actual numbers, so forgive me for just inventing a few of these off the top of my head, but certainly this will give you an idea of what we're facing. Let's say it's 1997 or something, and we purchase a certain amount of F-18 Hornets. And then 9/11 comes along, and the Congress basically says to the Navy, here's a blank check, buy what you need. So they buy a number of F-18 Hornets, a larger number of them. Now, when you buy an aircraft like that, a combat aircraft, there's a lifetime assigned to that aircraft. What is the usable number of flight hours for that particular airframe? And I'm simply going to say 10,000 flight hours. It might be a little more, a little less, but it's got to be somewhere 8,000, somewhere in that vicinity, right? So far, so good. So it's 2001. We buy a bunch of Hornets. They've got 8,000 hour lifespan on the airframe, and that is projected to last 20 years. Again, the numbers are rough, but you get the idea. So we buy these aircraft, and we find ourselves in these big kinetic actions in Afghanistan and Iraq. And essentially what happens is we fly off 7,000, 8,000 of the 10,000 total hours in 3 or 4 years. So these aircraft that were supposed to have an airframe lifespan and a calendar lifespan don't match up anymore because we've used up so many hours of the airframe in a very short period on the calendar. And what that means is we have a fleet full of older aircraft that are not in the kind of shape they should be, and we have to continually cannibalize more and more of them to keep the other ones flying because they they're just worn out, and that is alarming as well. The thing I will say that's not alarming, however, is, excuse me, I just really like the way this admiral thought. Again, he's like a just like a high school football coach. That informal, that conversational, just and real excited, real high energy. And he said one of the things that he's been trying to do and are having some success with is, he says, we're trying to increase the lethality of our fleet. He said, I'm tired of us thinking defensively. And immediately I'm on board. You think about the posture of the Navy and the weapon systems and all of this, just the structure of a carrier battle group, right? I mean, you've got guided missile destroyers and some cruisers and perhaps even a frigate or two out there, and they're anti-submarine and they're anti-air, anti-surface ship. These are essentially defensive positions. And he wanted to be able to strike things, which seems to me like a damn good thing for the Navy to know how to do. So he wrote a published brief, which is in my car, printed by the Navy, and his battle plan. Well, first of all, the overall strategy is called "Return to Control of the Sea," and the fact that we have to say "return to" is a indication of what has happened during the last 8 years of this country and its military posture. Return to command of the sea, or control of the sea, one or the other. So his strategy is this. He said the U.S. Navy is often seen to have a weakness in our long supply line, since we have to be in so many places. The U.S. Navy is the policeman of the world. We keep the sea lanes open, and that means we have to have a presence everywhere. And the more ships we have, the easier that is. And now we have so few ships, the harder it is. And he said, now a lot of people think that our supply lines, keeping those things oiled and so on, or fueled or whatever, I don't think they fill them full of coal anymore. Although it'd be awesome if they did, just for the ability to say so. That's a shortcoming. Parenthetically, this I certainly didn't know. To get from Pacific, from the base at San Diego to Pearl Harbor, DDG will probably burn about 40% of its total fuel capacity. And what's good to know is that they never let those vessels get below 60%. At any given time, those warships have 60% of their fuel available or more. When they get down to around 60%, they refuel. As a matter of fact, while we were out there was a tanker out there just waiting. The tanker was just going in big circles, and so were we. The tanker was the Kaiser, by the way, the William Kaiser, from same guy as Kaiser Permanente. Kaiser was the guy who developed the Liberty ships, and his shipbuilding skill, his management skill, really. They finished a complete Liberty ship, which is a decent-sized vessel. It's what won the war. He built one, and it was either in 24 hours or 48 hours. It wasn't longer than 48 hours from the keel down to pushing her off the rails. It's absolutely unbelievable. So anyway, they were ready to take on some more fuel from the Kaiser and keep her tanked up and so on. But what this admiral is talking about is a plan that he's calling distributed lethality. I like the sound of that very much. Vice Admiral Rowden, I'm going to go with Rowden. Vice Admiral Rowden's idea is that we should turn what appears to be a disadvantage into an advantage. I'm liking this more and more. He's basically saying, let's make sure that our dispersed assets are pretty much ammoed up and given a lot of offensive firepower and a relative degree of self-sufficiency, and let's make their offensive capability much higher. And he said, in that case, we no longer have a supply problem. The enemy has a multiple threat axis problem. We're coming at them from everywhere. And it was just refreshing to hear a guy talk about getting the armed forces back into doing what they're supposed to do, which is go out and kill bad guys. And it was just very interesting. I'm going to read the details of it, but I like this distributed lethality thing very much. I think it's a very sound concept, and I'm glad to hear that somebody's thinking about it. Now, he's scheduled to retire in April. I don't know whether the Navy's going to make him an offer to keep him on, but if they let him go, they're going to be making a very, very big mistake. One of the things he did, by the way, was nuclear power engineer for many years. So the fact that we have people like that out there, our command, naval command structure, and the officers that we have are exceptional. The crews are absolutely great, but the officers are fantastic. And we better hope that quality of officer and that quality of tactical thinking, level of training, and so on, is going to overcome a 10 or 12 to 1 numerical disadvantage in the not too distant future. One final thing to say about this whole thing. One of the things we saw while we were out there was a repair drill, a damage control drill, and the damage control officer for the spruants is a young lady who she can't weigh 100 pounds soaking wet, and she is commanding the damage control teams on board the ship from her central office, and she's got these actual wall charts, diagrams of the ship, and with grease pencils she's marking off where flooding is, where fires are, and so on. And she is just absolutely running the show. I have 100% confidence in this young lady's ability to keep that ship fighting for as long as it can. But one of the things that's interesting is that the Chinese are buying all these new, building all of these new destroyers, but they're not catching on real quick in terms of what we have learned as a naval power over the last 200 years. And the damage control is a perfect example. In other navies, there is a damage control team. They're specialists. They're fire specialists and so on. And when the ship gets hit, the damage control teams go out there and do their job. That's not how it works anymore in the United States Navy. Everybody is a member of the damage control team. Any single member of the crew is capable of fighting a fire immediately. And that is an amazing and should be very obvious improvement. The fact that anybody on that crew can do it. And furthermore, all of the damage control equipment, the things you need, not only just fire extinguishers, but repair kits and so on, that's also dispersed throughout the ship. So that way, if you have a fire someplace, and the fire is keeping the damage control team and the damage control equipment away from where something worse is happening, it's not a factor in the United States Navy because the entire repair ability of the ship is distributed throughout the ship. I'm sorry. Quickle Coin asks, "You're confused if I was on a Spruance class destroyer or an Arleigh Burke. They're different classes." It's absolutely true. However, I was on both. I was on board an Arleigh Burke destroyer called USS Spruance. And I assume that means that the original Spruance is the ship of the class 2 generations ago has been retired and the name was reassigned. I don't know that for a fact, but that's the only thing that makes sense to me. So it was the Spruance class and then the Kidd class, then the Arleigh Burke class, now the Zumwalt class. Those are what we're doing with our guided missile destroyers. Anyway, it had better come down to superior tactics, superior warfighting, superior morale, and all that stuff, because some of the stuff they told me was very, very alarming and something we're just going to have to elaborate on. So much for that. That was a fun 45 minutes. Let's get into the questions here. Again, haven't read them, and I'll see some familiar names here. So let's start with Steve Darrow. I'll move this a little further away from us. Here we go. At some point in the comment section on one of the right angle videos, someone suggested having a Stratosphere Lounge with you, Scott, and Steve hosting together. I love this idea and saw that Steve responded with, "I'm game. What do you think?" I'd love to do it. It's an interesting idea. I don't know exactly how it would work. We there's a bit of a lag. It's not too bad for us. It was horrible when I was working for NRA TV. It was a 2 second lag. It's almost impossible to have a conversation with because you say something and then they keep talking and nobody can hear what you're saying and then they stop talking. Now both of us have stopped talking. But I'd be happy to do it. I really would. I just don't know how to do the responsibility for answers, and also I'm not entirely sure how we would do it technically. The 3-panel show that we do for Right Angle is done in post-production. Each one of us is recording an individual video feed rather, high-quality video feed to our local hard drives. We're looking at each other through Skype, but we're not recording the Skype conversation. Well, I am, but as a backup. Excuse me, what a pig. So doing it in real time may be beyond our ability, but it's certainly something I'd love to think about, and I'll talk to these guys about it when I get a chance to see them next week. Let's see, our friend Susan Speakman is back, and I just trying to expand out this comment thing, and it just kind of went away. Hang on. I says, view 37 more comments, and that's what I would like to do. Okay, here we go. So Susan Speakman wants to know, given the ever-widening ripples of the Harvey Weinstein debacle, would now be a good time for some deep-pocketed conservatives, or at least Republicans, to stage a takeover of Hollywood? If so, what would such a coup look like? What kind of money would it take? How could it actually be accomplished? Susan, I'm going to tell you something that's just the reality of the world the way it is now, and I don't want you to think I'm being overly pessimistic or angry or bitter. It's just the way it is. Yesterday I did a Nexus report, which, by the way, we've been doing every single day. Been very proud of that. When I realized I had to make a decision between either NRA shows or continuing this business as it existed, I knew that one of the keys to going on would be the discipline of getting a show out every day. And we've done one every day of the Nexus report. They've been really great. They're like little mini firewalls. But one of the things that we talked about yesterday was that George Soros just basically transferred almost all of his personal fortune into the Open Society Foundation. Among many problematic policies of the Open Societies Foundation is the idea that food, healthcare, housing, and so on are rights, and if they're rights, they have to be provided by somebody. And if they're rights, I don't know how you justify having a better house than somebody else if everybody has a right to housing. But put that aside. He made a deposit for this sort of umbrella foundation that funds all of the other things like Black Lives Matter and all the rest, and Occupy Wall Street. He's behind everything. And he deposited $18 billion. $18,000 million to continue the left-wing takeover of the country. And it's been spectacularly successful. You have young people following a 70-something-year-old lunatic who thinks that we have too many different brands of deodorant because of George Soros. So, $18 billion. Now, I am far, far from the world's best salesman by any means, but it just doesn't happen on the conservative side. And this is quite shocking to me and has been quite shocking to me. When it comes time to actually put down some money to counter this message, we just don't have it. We don't have those kind of big people, and we don't have the kind of grassroots commitment that the progressives have, which I find quite surprising and so on. But it's just a fact. It's the way it is. And on any given Stratosphere Lounge, there's probably on YouTube 4,000 or 5,000 people watching this. And there are people who've been watching this show for 5 years and aren't members. And I'm not asking for $18 billion. We're looking for $9.95 a month. And that's the future. The future is not on television. The future is this. And somebody's got to pay for this to keep this thing going. And very few people do. That's why I thank the members so profusely. And it's disturbing. It's especially disturbing because we're sliding away here, and I don't know what it would take to alarm people enough to write a check for something. And it's been very difficult, and not just with me. So I can't really quite understand that. The thing I try to tell at least larger potential investors and donors and so on is whatever you think about your money's worth on this particular donation, try to understand one thing that you really do need to keep in mind. The people that we're fighting here don't want 2,000 of your dollars or 20,000 or 200,000. They don't want that. They want all of it. All of it. And they are succeeding in producing a generation that will soon be voting, and that voting generation is going to vote away all of your prosperity. They're going to vote it to themselves. And it's happening right before our eyes. And the reason we're getting blocked on Facebook and the reason we're being suppressed on YouTube is because it's working. And it scares them. Prager has a 1.2 million likes, I think, something in that number. The marketing director for Prager University told me on the air that of the 1.2 million, or whatever their total number of likes is, when they post a video, which is why people like the Prager page in the first place on Facebook, when Prager posts a video, it goes out to 2% of their total people that have signed up to see the videos. 2%, not 20%. 2% get the video on their wall. And the reason that happens is because these things are effective. And I know they're effective because a number of people stop me and say hi, and I love it when people stop me and say hi. It's just an absolute joy for me to finally meet some of the people that have been watching for a long time. But it also means that, to my astonishment, I'm being recognized an awful lot out there. That means the message is going somewhere. And young people are recognizing me, and that means something good too. But it's just a constant frustration. Jeremy Boring, I think it was Jeremy Boring who said it early, and I mean like 10 years ago. He said the problem is, look, television is free, the internet is free, and you want me to pay for television on the internet? But first of all, the television wasn't free. You were paying for it in the form of advertisements, and if you watched a half-hour comedy, you're really getting 23 minutes of comedy and 7 minutes of commercials, and we didn't think anything about that. Yes, I see it, Eric. Thank you very much. As I said, this is the future. It's going to be people paying for the kind of programming they want to pay for, and that means doing it on a small scale. In any event, I'm going to continue to try and do this because I know these messages are working. I know they resonate. I don't know if anybody's seen the friendlyism video, but that has been, I've had several teachers, including our friend Cheryl Toomey, who just basically said, I've been waiting for something like this for 15 or 20 years. I've been waiting for something to explain socialism to people on a first grade level, because when you explain something as if to small children, it becomes very clear. And so we're continuing to try to do that. So if you've been watching for a long time and you like the stuff and you have the means to do it, we need the resources. Not just me, and not just this company. This country needs these resources. Bone Canoe said, "Go on, Mo." Again, I did that this afternoon. We did a gun control thing. Ruben was fun. All of this stuff, and we're getting some more likes and all that other stuff. But the likes are not really turning into the likes are not turning into revenue. And we have to contrast this with the left, who is paying money through the nose. They're making television shows like Star Trek Discovery. I can't even say Star Trek and Discovery in the same sentence anymore. It's just one gigantic social engineering monstrosity. But they get a lot of money to produce it. And people are making these anti-American movies, and they cost $25-30 million for a small one, and it makes $800,000 back, and they don't care, because what they know that the prize is not $25 million. The prize is $71 trillion, which is the total value of the private property in the United States of America. That's what they want. Dinesh D'Souza got it exactly right. What is the most valuable thing in the world? It's the private property in the United States of America. If you're going to steal something, that's the thing to steal, $71 trillion. And they're doing it. They're doing it several $1 trillion a year. So I'm not optimistic about people stepping up. However, and I didn't mean to be quick with you there, Eric, as Eric pointed out 6 or 7 times in the comment section, there is a Trump supporter who's looking to buy out the Weinstein Company. And I don't think you can, I certainly think you can buy the Weinstein Company, and you can take the very liberal things and progressive things that they do off the market. But I don't think that that you're going to get a whole lot of headway trying to produce conservative movies. They'll do all right at the box office, but that's not the issue, you see. These progressive movies don't do well at the box office. Syriana and Redacted, they don't do well. They just keep reinforcing this narrative. That's all they want to do. And you have to admire the tenacity of these miserable bastards. They don't give up. They've been doing it for 50, 60 years, or 100 years, really, at least 100 years, and they just keep going. They know if they keep at it, they're going to get there, and they're getting there. As the entire discussion about the Navy we just had, they're getting there. And Soros is putting lots and lots of money into it. Guys like Weinstein did, and Steven Spielberg, and Katzenberg, and so on, and Bill Gates, and Apple. They put billions of dollars into these left-wing organizations in order to crank out the left-wing message. And we're watching these things come for our children, and we're just sitting there going, no, just don't really feel like paying for it. I get better bang for my buck over here at Conservative Review or whatever. So that's where that is. And one of the things we're doing to try to get this membership up is we're going for consistency. And I really didn't want to talk to people about the membership thing until I had confidence that we could do a show a day. And we have been doing a show a day. We'll continue to do a show a day of the Nexus Report, as well as Firewall. It just came out. I'll do another one this week called Harvey is Hollywood. And we'll just keep pushing it out the door until something breaks, one side or another. So that's the case. I wish I had better news for you, but that's not been my experience, Susan, or the experience of virtually everybody I know in this business. A lot of people saying, "My God, what do we do to save the country?" And then you say, "Well, you could help pay for some of this content." And I didn't mean didn't want to go that far. So there you go. By happy coincidence, the next question is submitted by known miscreant and degenerate Matthew Lloyd, who says, "Educate us on Soros. It's easy to understand why politicians on the left are intent on destroying Western civilization. It increases their power and lines their pockets. Soros isn't a politician. What does he get out of this? Why would a billionaire who survived the Nazis be so intent on sowing leftist extremism, destroying freedom, and increasing the power of the state?" Well, let's start with the most simple of these things, Matt. He survived the Nazis because he collaborated with the Nazis. He openly said that the times that he spent, I think he's from Hungary, that the years he spent in Hungary turning over Hungarian Jews was the best years of his life. What do you say about a guy like that? What do you say about a guy like that? Soros knows he's not going to live forever. Soros made his money, and he made a lot of money, by essentially gaming the financial markets. And my understanding is he basically crashed the British economy and just cashed out on the wreckage. So I'm not, I don't put anything like this past him. Soros is a guy who is about control. When you've got that kind of money, you don't need to make more money. T-Dog Lyle said that he thought that Clavin was the degenerate. Clavin is beyond degeneracy. Clavin is there's a word for Clavin that I can't repeat on TV. Miserable swine. But he is about the control. And a guy who enjoys collaborating with the Nazis against his own people is the kind of guy that's got some warped priorities. So he is doing what he's doing, and so are Bill Gates and Spielberg and Weinstein and all the rest of it. Because when you get right down to it, what they want is control, and they know that they are the connected people. There's nothing that these people would rather have than political control over the worker units. And it's not just because they make more money. It's because they need to control people's lives. And the people that don't have that evil motivation, let's just take Steven Spielberg or Katzenberg or somebody for that, in that category. Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you very much. Apple, for example, or Microsoft, they want what huge businesses always want. They want to be able to buy the political power to lock competitors out of the market. They started as quick little mammals, and now they're gigantic lumbering dinosaurs, and they don't want the competition. They want to lock it out. But ultimately, they want to control all kinds of things, which is a little segue into something that I think is more interesting than this. I was talking with the fighter squadron commander, and he was asking me who I thought controlled the world. And I said, nobody controls the world. And he was a little shocked by that. I said, it's orders of magnitude too complex. There are just too many variables. And the election of Donald Trump is the perfect example of how, even with all of the political machine and the pop culture machine, the music machine, the whole thing, even with the full court press, with the media handing Hillary Clinton questions in advance on debates, with everything on the table, they still lost because it is too chaotic to control. So I don't think George Soros runs the world from behind the scenes. I don't think anybody does. My experience in life has been, especially when I got to Hollywood, my experience in life has been pretty simple. I thought when I got into entertainment that as I came in, greenhorn, wet behind the ears, and as I got more experience, I would move up just move up. And that's exactly what happened. And as we continue to move up and gain more credibility and get higher paying jobs and more important jobs, I thought, as I'm sure many people unconsciously do think, that if I work hard enough, I'll get to the top of this group. And then the time is going to come, after I've paid my dues, where somebody's going to basically pull aside the curtain, and they're going to show us all of the levers of control, and they're going to introduce us to the people that are operating the levers of control, and they're going to show us how to work the levers of control so that we can basically carry on. When I say control, I mean of a business, not of society necessarily. And the one thing I've learned is that, I forget his name, is a screenwriter named William somebody, I'll show up in 15 seconds. William Gibson, maybe. And he said about Hollywood, he said, ain't nobody knows nothing about anything. And that's it, because when you get to the top and you open the curtain, there is nobody operating the levers. There aren't even any levers. There's just nothing there. It's astonishing to me how absolutely stupid some very, very powerful people are. So Soros he is an evil man, and his motivations are evil. He's coming from a society that had collectivism in both the communist form and the Nazi form, and he's trying to bring it here. What do you say about that guy? He's just plain evil. He wants to be in control, and he knows which politicians to buy. So that's George Soros. And now BillWhittle.com, among others, have to face $18 billion of resources that are being thrown against us. And it doesn't intimidate me, but it does tend to focus the mind a little bit. Okay, Dave Olson, maybe do two or three more. It's a real rogues gallery of regulars here. Dave Olson says there was a time when it took millions of dollars and the backing of a major studio to get a movie made. Now anyone can scrape together $5,000 and walk out of a Best Buy with a couple of HD cameras, Bluetooth microphones, a mid-level Mac on which to insert special effects, thus starting their own movie studio. I see this as a good thing because Hollywood seems to be overrun with perverts. What do you think the movie industry will look like in 10 years? And how many more Harvey Weinstein type shoes are there to drop? Great question. I'm going to call this next firewall, which I hope to shoot tomorrow. Harvey is Hollywood. All of these people getting up on their hind legs and talking about Harvey Weinstein and how awful it is. First of all, I find it pretty, let's just say, unsettling that very powerful women knew about this and didn't say a word. It was forgive the term, it's a Hollywood term, and I don't mean anything by it, but essentially it was a nobody. It was a nobody who stood up and made these charges. And then the floodgates opened, and out it came because now there was social proof. It was okay to criticize Harvey Weinstein because he was already destroyed, and so you had nothing to lose by it. The most telling sentence in the whole Harvey Weinstein thing for me so far has been one of the ones in the very first or second story that was reported, and it was Ashley Judd. She was talking about how she was in a hotel room with Harvey Weinstein 20 years ago. And Harvey was making, William Goldman, thank you, Janine. And Harvey was making the advances on her, and she said, my thought was, how do I get out of this room as quickly as possible without alienating Harvey Weinstein? That's Hollywood. It's not how do I get out of this room as quickly as possible and report him to the police. How do I get out of this room as quickly as possible without alienating Harvey Weinstein? The career comes first. And there's an awful lot of I don't mean for a second to be putting the blame on the victims here, not by any means, but this torrent of indignation from Hollywood is embarrassing. There are so many people coming out talking about that they knew about this. It's an indictment of the entire system, the entire culture. These are the people that are educating our children. These are the people that are determining how to vote. And they're horrible people. And I've been saying this for a long time. They're interesting people, but they're horrible people. And I've just come off of several hours with people who aren't horrible people. And the people here in the Stratosphere, well, let's not get carried away. The fact is, though, they're terrible people. So the answer is, how many shoes are there left to drop? I don't know. How many shoes have you got? How long do you want to be here, and how high can you count? It's endemic. Jeremy had a number of meetings where he was simply shocked because he has a moral core at what was openly being said. You go to a meeting to pitch a script to top-level studio executives. There'll be 3 men in there and a woman, and they start talking about, what was her name? I can never remember her name. Jessica Biel. I guess I can remember her name. And they were talking about whether or not they would do her, and then the woman executive said, oh, yeah, definitely, I'd do her in a heartbeat. She had to say that because that's the handshake. That's the handshake. As Jeremy points out, if that had been any other business, the woman would have owned the business the next day because of the lawsuit that she would be able to bring successfully. The deals in Hollywood are paid for in flesh, and actors and actresses primarily, not exclusively, understand this. And one story I've heard that really set the stage, so to speak, for what we're dealing with is I remember a story about a not a super famous actress, but a well-known actress, a name, and her assistant. She and her assistant got to be very close. It seemed like they were personal friends. And they ended up on location. Needless to say, when they go on location for the actress, they bring the assistant with them. And the actress started to sleep around with the director. And the assistant, naive little waif that she was, sat down with the actress and said, blank, I just hope you take this in the way I intended. It's just coming at you not as a coworker, but as a friend. This is very bad. This is going to jeopardize everything that you're doing. And the actress became enraged. And here's what she said. She said, "Don't you dare tell me how to run my career." So that's the second part of the question first. The first part of the question is more interesting, in my opinion, Dave. I don't want to retread too much of the ground that I've covered before, but there's good news and bad news. The world, the earth is changing. I can smell it in the air. I can taste it in the water. This show that you're watching now, the shows we produce here, this is the future. This is what it looks like. It's going to be a question of personal credibility and affinity and all the rest of it. The network news is going away, and all of it is going away, and we can watch it go away right in front of our eyes. Newsweek was sold, all these other magazines are sold, Rolling Stone's out of business, all of it. This is the future. And so there's good news and bad news here. The bad news is twofold, although it's the same phenomenon. The bad news is, since there's no longer, 20 million, 50 million eyeballs, Jeffrey Devlin, bless you. Steve Darrow just said that Jeffrey Devlin just joined BillWhittle.com. Jeffrey, thank you. Thank you very much. We will do our level best to spend that money as effectively as we can, and I will do my personal best to make sure we don't let you down, and see to it that you look back on that decision with happy thoughts. Thank you very much. Back to where I was. When Friends was on in the 90s, you could put together 20, 30 million eyeballs. That's a lot of eyeballs. It's a lot of purchasing power, so advertisers would pay money. And during the final year of Friends, every single one of the 6-person cast was getting $1 million an episode. Not a year, obviously. $1 million an episode. Because you could put enough eyes on Friends to make it worth it. And as the networks gave way to cable stations, as we went from 3 channels to 40 channels, that pool of eyeballs split up, and you couldn't get them all in the same place anymore. And as that 40 channels broke up into essentially an infinite number of channels with internet programming and YouTube and user content, all the rest of it, it becomes tougher and tougher and tougher to put enough eyes in one place. In fact, it becomes virtually impossible to get enough people together in one place to make money from advertising. And so the only thing left is a membership model. It's the only thing that works. NPR's been doing the membership model for decades. But it's essentially saying that we don't have any way of controlling the content. I wouldn't limit it if I could. And essentially, just like NPR, I'm kind of on the honor system here, I'm just basically assuming that that I know for a certain fact that the people that are already members are doing it not so much for members-only programming or anything like that. And while I deeply appreciate the affection that I get from people, I don't think they do it specifically to help me out. They do it because they know that the messaging we do here is I think it's the best messaging in the world. And they much more often than not, our membership says, Bill, we know this is a members only program. Please make this one public. It's important people to see it. So basically there's a small group of people out of our total 50 million views on YouTube, let's say, that are paying for everybody else. They're paying for everybody else to watch it. So that's the deal. So again, this is all the bad news. It's difficult to do that. Now, the good news is, as you point out, the ability to make a movie has gone from millions of dollars to a few thousands of dollars, probably less than $10,000. Digital cameras, I shoot the firewalls, and I've been shooting the Nexus reports on a Blackmagic camera that costs less than $2,000, and it is 1080. It's what they shoot feature films on. It's astonishing. It's astonishing. The editing system is essentially it's a good Mac. It was a good Mac when I bought it in 2013, which means it's very obsolete by now, but it's perfectly fine. I'm very happy with it. That's perfect for the editing. I've seen Jonathan Hay over at Daily Wire did the special effects for the Arroyo. And he said, oh, we're going to have the back window of this truck get hit with bullets and shatter, and then we're going to do this. And I said, sure you are. He hadn't used the software yet. He'd never used it. He had to learn it. But by the time he was finished, the special effects in that movie were superb because he has talent, and it cost him $200 probably for After Effects or whatever. So the good news is you can do more and more and more at a very high level of quality at very little cost. So I've been saying this for 7, 8, 10 years now, and it becomes more relevant every day. On the occasions when people say, I want to be a writer, film writer, director or something, should I move to Los Angeles? I always have the same response for them. This is the last place you should be. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. It is the last place on earth you should be, especially if you're a conservative. Even if you're not, it's essentially a zero probability game. What I mean by that is this. If you come to Hollywood as a new scriptwriter and you've got a script that you just love, it's really terrific. And it is, let's say, it is in fact actually a terrific script. By far the most likely outcome for that script is not that it's going to get produced by somebody. By far the most likely outcome for that script is that somebody's going to make you an offer of probably high 5, low 6 figures to buy the script. You'll take it and be overjoyed, and it will sit on a shelf for the rest of time because the studio is not doing it to make it. The studio is buying your script not so that they can make it. They're buying your script so that someone else can't make it. This is exactly what happens. It may seem crazy to you, but I swear this is exactly what happens. Most of these sales are made specifically so that that film never gets produced. They don't want to, they for whatever reason, it's not one of the 10 or 12 or 5 movies that they're going to make that year, but they know it's a terrific script and they don't want anybody else to get it, so they basically buy it and you get your you get your food pellets, and that's a nice thing, don't get me wrong. And for many writers, myself included, just any kind of a check is just astonishing. But that's basically what happens here. And that's for liberals and progressives. It comes down to connections. It comes down to any number of things. But the number of movies that are made compared to the number of scripts that are written is shocking. And it makes me wonder, I often wonder, how many unbelievable stories there are out there. Unbelievable stories that are never going to see the light of day. Either the script didn't get submitted, or it was put on the shelf, or it was, what was it, in turnaround? Turnaround means we're going to kind of produce it, and then, we decided not to. That's the end of the world. It's over. So this is the worst place for you to be. If somebody said to me, how do I make a movie? I would say, where do you live? And if they said, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, I would say, well, then I would put together a budget and a business plan, and I would find the 3 biggest car dealers in Nashville, Tennessee, and I would show them what it costs to make a movie and how much movies make. And my entire pitch would be this. I can make a movie of the same quality as a $30 million movie, but I can make it for $800,000. And so we don't have to make $30 million to make a profit. If this film makes $20 million, The $30 million film is a terrible loss. If it makes $20 million for us, we've done more than 20 times your initial investment. That's where I would go with it, and that's where I plan to go with it. So, yeah, T-Dog is saying Paranormal Activity was made for $15,000 and made $193 million. Blair Witch was $60,000 and made $250 million. Now, these are exceptions, no question. But since you asked this kind of in the weeds question, let me rephrase that, inside baseball question, Dave. The secret now is to keep the negative costs low. The only way to make a small movie successfully these days is to make as shallow a hole as possible that you have to dig out from. And again, if you can get it in theaters, and it's worth it buying theater, just four-wall it, just buy the screen time so that you can say it ran in theaters. If it ran in theaters, it puts it in a different category than direct to video. It puts it in a higher category. Even if you buy a theater and you show it in Abilene. If you have a film and the film is good enough, even if it's not good enough, with worldwide distribution and everything else, you can be pretty sure that even if it's essentially just blank leader with an NTSC tone on it, you're probably going to make back $700,000-800,000 worldwide in foreign rentals as well as the domestic and DVD market, Apple, iTunes, and Amazon, and all the rest. At least that. So the question is, can you make the movie inexpensively? Because if you can, then a catastrophic return is still a bit of a profit. And if the film has any kind of magic at all, now you're starting to talk about, real opportunity, real money. It doesn't have to be Paranormal Activity, especially if it costs $15,000 or $20,000 or whatever. I'd buy the gear, and I don't know. This is just a general speech to those of you that may be interested in this recipe for the destruction of your life. But if we learn by doing, and all of the things I learned as a director, I learned from editing. I learned from being in an editing room and saying, I need to go from this shot to this shot. I have to have a cutaway, and I don't have it. It's just not here. And I needed to do this, or that car is traveling in the wrong direction, or whatever. You make your mistakes out there in the field, but you learn what those mistakes are in the editing room. With that said, I was a theater major, and I remember very clearly sitting, rehearsing upstairs in Constance Theater lobby, just a big open lobby, after hours, nobody up there. I remember rehearsing in there. I remember rehearsing in black boxes. I remember rehearsing in various classrooms and so on. And I remember being able to tell very, very clearly, whether the actors I was working with were good or not. You may think that sounds kind of obvious, but sometimes it's not. Some people don't. They can't tell the difference. By the way, interesting point here. Eric Blake says David Mamet. We should do an entire Stratosphere Lounge on David Mamet alone. Said that the best thing for a wannabe screenwriter is to be a writer-director. He's absolutely right. What Mamet is basically saying is it's easier to raise money than it is to sell a script. That's it in a nutshell, actually. I don't have to say anything more than that. That's really pretty much it. It is easier to raise money than it is to sell a script. And given what I said about them putting your script on the shelf for the rest of time, it also means that as a director, it's going to get made. Now, I wouldn't start directing a feature film unless you knew what you were doing. I had done a number of small films before my first feature film, but I had nothing like enough experience. It was a catastrophe. But you not only, if you raise the money and you wrote a script, then you're going to get the story made and you're going to direct it. So that not only means it doesn't sit on the shelf, it also means that it doesn't have to go through another kind of living hell. And the living hell can best be described this way. You write a very moving story about a soldier who comes back and experiences all kinds of PTSD and through getting together with his former comrades and facing the horrors of war, he's able to finally pull himself out of this hole of depression and reach a point where he's not only able to get married and live a happy life, but is also able to help his fellow warriors make the readjustment to come home. And you write that script and it's beautiful. And then the person who's bought it decides they're going to add a talking dog to this story. That the whole thing would be much more interesting if there was a talking dog that talked in kind of a funny voice. And that would be the dog that would narrate the script. See? It's brilliant, isn't it? Not kidding about the talking dog. Producers are a breed apart. There are many filmmakers who make great producers, but people who are exclusively producers, I think a very small percentage of them know what they're doing. First of all, there's a large number of them, and an almost uncountable number of them that are essentially Harvey Weinstein. They're movie producers just so they can, use it as leverage to get in the sack. But when the talking dog issue comes up, that's not even really a producer. What we're really talking about there is network or studio. You get network notes or studio notes, or network input or studio input. Now we're talking about extremely stupid people, middle management people who are getting an outrageous sum of money. So if I write a TV show or something and I submit it to NBC, I'm talking about 15, 20 years ago, back when I knew what I was doing, when the business is changing so fast, as we just said. But I might write a really great script and send it in, and it will come back with network or studio fingerprints on it. And that means that some woman, let's say, who's making $230,000 a year to be the vice president in terms of development has to touch this. Because if she doesn't touch it and change it, then people are going to start asking, what are we paying her for? And so now, what was once a real work of art becomes this. It becomes the talking dog version of your really interesting story. And this is a special form of hell. It really is. I've had a bit of an experience with it, but it's a special form of hell to watch people take something that's very good and make it worse. That I actually have had a fair amount of experience with in the edit room. I've had experiences with some producers who make changes, and I look at it and I'm reluctant to make changes because I've got it the way I wanted to, and I look at the changes and said, this is actually much better. But that's unusual. Most of the time when I was doing Sunday Morning Shootout, and I just checked IMDb on that a couple days ago, I think we did 194 episodes over 5 years, and of the 194 episodes, I cut 190 of them. I didn't do the last 4 because I started at PJTV. But of that 190 shows that I edited, virtually all of the notes I got made the show worse. And in some cases, they made it much worse. And I say that objectively. I'm not saying they made it worse because it was my work that got changed. I'm saying they made it worse because people were making artistic decisions, and they're not artists. They're not writers. They're not directors. They have no training. They have no experience. They're simply middle management people who've managed to glad hand their way into an executive position in a studio or a network, and their job is to make changes to good content. That's the deal. You don't have to do with any of that. Go find some car dealers in wherever you are. Don't lie to them, because you can make a pretty decent case if you can keep the budget small. The short form of this 20-minute answer is, if you can keep the budget low enough, which is possible these days with the technology being as good as it is and as inexpensive as it is, you can make a good movie, but you got to be a good writer, you've got to be a good director, and you have to find good actors. And for God's sakes, find a good sound man, because bad sound is the single thing that makes a movie just seem cheap. I was sitting with my wonderful wife, who I miss very much and who I'm going to be going home to in just a few moments. And we were watching The Mummy, the Tom Cruise Mummy. And 30 seconds into that movie, you knew you were in trouble. And 2 minutes into the movie, you knew you were in big trouble. And after we watched this appallingly bad movie, we sat down and started talking about what's the difference between a good movie and a bad movie. Why does a movie look good and another movie look bad? And she's the best photographer I've ever seen. I think she's the best photographer in the world. One of the things that we talked about very quickly was the way the film is shot. And I can give you just a happy little pocket guide to experience here. But essentially, the reason that real movies, look like movies, and again, no offense intended, why Hollywood movies look like real movies and why church movies look like church movies is because in Hollywood, the directors of photography understand that it's all about the focal plane. That's a pretty simple thing to say, but it's really that simple. It's all about the focal plane. Not the framing is important, camera placement is important, movement, all of that, but it's essentially the focal plane. Amateur films have everything in focus. I'm in focus. The wallpaper print 20 feet behind me is in focus. And we look at this at a flat screen, so the audience is focusing on a flat screen. And on this flat screen, things that are far away are in focus and things that are up close are in focus. And we don't notice it. It's completely subconscious for us. But that's not how we see the world. If you look at anything around you, just look around your room, you will see that what you're looking at is in focus and everything else around it is not in focus. And the further away you get from that thing, the further out of focus it is. And Hollywood professionals understand that you have to shoot a movie so that only the thing that you want people to see is in focus. You look at a great movie and the background is out of focus, but the actor is in very sharp focus and it pulls them out. Lighting can do that too. Pull people out. That's why shooting against a blank wall is the worst thing you could possibly do. It's like cell animation. It's like your character is just a cutout from the daisy pattern on the wall. We don't have 3D, not yet anyway, not consistently or commonly. And so lighting can pull things out. You keep the background dark or you light the person in the foreground. Very rarely you could keep the background bright and dark in the foreground where the person is. Dave Wellman wants to know what I mean when I say church movies. I mean things like God Isn't Dead, which I thought was a pretty good movie, but it looked like a church movie. Churches have been putting in hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of dollars to get conservative religious films made. And that was what I meant by that. I didn't mean anything disparaging to it. God bless them for doing it, and every little bit helps. But most of them look so amateur that I think they actually hurt the cause more than help it. So little things like that. Little things like I'm not nearly as up on the sound as I am on the picture. But there are two things that you might find interesting about sound. One of them is, even if you're in a multi-millionaire's scene is set in a multi-million-dollar bedroom, and let's say you've got a slasher horror film, when the person strikes, more often than not, the editor will put in, completely unnoticed by your brain, but absolutely noticed by the base of your spine, they'll put in the sound of snapping twigs and grass rustling. Because we're coded biologically to hear a twig snap gets our attention. And that's hardwired. That's not something we learn. It's just hardwired into our survival mechanisms. So they will put things like that in and scare the bejesus out of you, and you don't even know why. That's actual art. That's the art form of filmmaking. That's superb quality work. You went to the movie to get scared, and they're using everything they know how to do to scare you. That's fantastic. 100% terrific. Another thing that they can do is they can put in a tone. This is not subliminal advertising or subliminal messaging, but it's close. Oftentimes, you'll find scenes that are trying to build suspense. There's the presence of a low tone. And it has the effect of making you uncomfortable. It's not something you can even identify. You don't even hear it, but it's there, and it's winding you up. And all of this, and since we're on the film subject, I will close the show with this because I love talking about movies. I don't get to do it often enough. I think you could make a pretty decent case that the only reason we know the name Steven Spielberg is because the shark broke. I really think you could make a pretty compelling case that no one would ever have heard of Steven Spielberg if the mechanical shark in Jaws worked the way it was supposed to. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, if the shark had worked the way it was supposed to, the shark would have been in a lot of shots. And if you remember the shot where Quint is eaten at the back end of the orca, you can see the mechanical shark, and you can see the sides of it are made out of pretty thin plastic, and the biting is mechanical. It's not a very convincing shark. And if the shark was working the way it was supposed to, then Spielberg would have used that shark in a lot of shots. But luckily for Spielberg, and this is not to say that Spielberg doesn't have talent, he has enormous talent, he has monumental talent. But luckily for him, the shark didn't work. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that since he had a movie, I forget what the budget of Jaws was, it's small, but it's, $7 million or 12 or something. It's a decent budget for those days. Jaws was the first of the mega hits. It was the first of the blockbuster hits ever. I remember it very clearly. It was his first movie that I can remember that was a social phenomenon. I suppose Gone with the Wind would qualify, but honestly, Jaws changed the entire world in filmmaking in general, and so did Spielberg. But here's the point. Because the shark didn't work, Spielberg had to sit down and say to himself, basically, I've taken $10 million of other people's money in order to produce a shark movie, and I don't have a shark for my shark movie. And that's a bit of a problem. So, being the talented individual that he is, they had to improvise. And what Spielberg did as a result of not having the shark working was he had to suggest the shark. He had to suggest that the shark was there without showing the shark. And I don't know if he was aware of it at the time. I suspect not. But in retrospect, that was why that movie worked so well, was because you saw the shark so infrequently. And the reason that Jaws is so terrifying is that 90% of the movie, that shark is in your imagination. You don't see it. And because you don't see it, you don't get that sense of, oh, it's a mechanical shark. And of all the things I've ever seen in filmmaking, I have to say, I really do think the most effective piece of improvisation I've ever seen, in fact, one of the most effective pieces of filmmaking I've ever seen, was in Jaws, where they're telling the stories and Quint is talking about being on board the Indianapolis. And then you're outside in the water and you see the fishing boat off in the distance, and then boom, 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 these three enormous barrels that they've put into the shark come to the surface. It's terrifying, and there's nothing there. If you think about the opening scene in Jaws, where the girl is attacked, I went in to see that movie. I was a young kid. Was 77 maybe, something like that. So I would have been 17, 18, somewhere in there. And that opening scene where the girl is attacked, she's supposed to be eaten by a shark, and you're supposed to see it, but he never showed it to you. You just saw her swimming along, and then there's this alarmed look, and then there's this, she's pulled under and she's dragged through the water, and then she's absolutely terrified and stunned, and she disappears, and they don't show you the shark, and they don't show you any blood. It's nighttime, it's pitch black, but it is horrifying. And that's why Spielberg is the genius that he is. But I still maintain if the shark was working, that we wouldn't have heard of that movie. It would have just looked, okay, it was all right, I guess. The ability to put that in your mind is what made it work. And also, I haven't seen Paranormal Activity, but Blair Witch is a perfect example of this. The Blair Witch Project worked because they had excellent actors and because they didn't have a Blair Witch. If they'd had a Blair Witch, the movie would have failed. And if the actors hadn't been as good as they were, the movie wouldn't fail. because the reason, and I like Blair Witch Project very much, but Blair Witch Project scared the daylights out of me, just scared the hell out of me. And the reason Blair Witch Project scared the hell out of me was because they never showed the witch. But the people, I'm looking at the screen and I don't see the witch, but I'm looking at somebody who does see the witch, and that person is terrified, and that makes me terrified. Yes, 1975. Thanks, Dave. So I was probably, 15, something like that. That's the genius of the Blair Witch Project. You see little things that are very disturbing. The little wooden dolls that are hanging in the forest are alarming. And certainly by the time they unwrap that little package, you've got a guy screaming off camera during the night. And they unroll that little package and you see human teeth in there. And that sends you just into orbit. You don't have to see the witch. The creature's always just out of frame. And when you see her in the tent, and all of a sudden there's this a giant attack on the outside of the tent, I just leapt out of my chair. I just scared the daylights out of me, because I had the same sense that they did. There's something out there and I can't see it. But when I see the look on their face, it's great. And when I say you have to have great actors, I don't remember any of them ever doing anything else. But the girl in that, the iconic image of the Blair Witch Project is her in the tent. She's got the knitted cap on. She's lighting herself from underneath, and she's doing recording into the camera, talking about how scared she is, and I bought it. She looks terrified, and her breathing and her sobbing and everything. She looks terrified, and she's seen the witch. So I didn't have to see the witch. I could see what the witch was doing to people. And the ending, the final shot, the whole thing in the house at the end was really spooky and eerie. But to be honest with you, that final shot just to this day just makes me, it was so perfectly set up. It was so perfectly set up. I don't think I've given anything away, Dave. It's all in the mind. It's theater of the mind, and it was beautifully written and magnificently acted, and very, very scary, especially for a movie that, that has a villain that lives in your head. Those are the scary ones, and people who can harness that are the people who are geniuses. If you've seen Psycho, everybody talks about the shower scene in Psycho where Janet Leigh is stabbed to death. Now that is a spoiler. And I've seen that sequence many times. It is probably the single greatest sequence in all of movies. But might surprise you to know that in that horrific scene where you watch this woman being stabbed to death repeatedly in the shower, there's not a shot in that montage where you ever see a knife touch the skin. It never happens. You are so convinced of what's happening, but there's not a shot in there where you see a knife actually touching skin. You see the knife being raised, you see the knife falling, you see blood in the water, you see Janet Leigh's expression, you see her fighting things off, but the knife never touches her, ever. And it is horrific. It's terrifying. Nice little piece of film trivia, by the way, is that The Blood in the Sink, it's a black and white movie. They tried using stage blood, and it just didn't look right. It looked kind of beige or tan or something. I think they had to use India ink. It's either India ink or Hershey syrup, but it was something like that. I'm pretty sure it was black ink. And you just see this black ink, which is blood in a black and white movie, just circling the drain, and it's horrible. It's horrible. And it's magnificent, is what it is. It's just magnificent. It's genius. And it's the power of this medium and the people that control, and the music. Good, well said, Sarge. The music. It's Bernard Herrmann, I think. I think so. That shrieking, reek, 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 reek. It's the sound of a knife cutting through the air. It's the sound of a knife, stabbing a beautiful woman. That's what it sounds like. And Ohio Coastie points out that now needless to say, this is a very interesting little story. I'm elaborating a little bit on what he wrote here in the comment section, but so Janet Leigh is the woman who's murdered in the shower, and she does the shower scene. I don't know how long it took. I'll bet it took him 2 days to shoot that. So basically, it was chocolate syrup. Thanks, T-Dog. Chocolate sauce. So Janet Leigh is standing around for 2 days, bored out of her wits, because it's taking 2 days to shoot a scene that lasts, somebody can tell me the exact number, 23 seconds, something like that. She's bored out of her mind, and she's wet, and she's cold, and she's miserable, and she's as far, I'm talking about the actress now, she's as far from being scared as she possibly could be. She's just plain bored and sick of it, and knows every shot set up because she was there for all of them. When she saw the movie, she was so frightened that she never took a shower again. She presumably took a bath, but she never, ever got back in the shower again. She was so scared by what Hitchcock had done. And if there's one person on the planet who should be immune to being afraid of that shower scene, it's Janet Leigh. Janet Leigh and Anthony Perkins. Because they're the only two people, really, plus Hitchcock, of the names that we know. There are obviously other crew members there. But they're the only two people that know that 20-second montage or whatever it was just a simple case of, okay, Anthony, let's try it again. A little more violent, please. A little longer between the that's good. Good. Okay, now let's do it again. And this is how it works on the set. The two people who should be absolutely immunized against any fear whatsoever from Psycho are the actors that were in it. But one of the actors was so scared by the art form, just the power of the movie, that she never took a shower again. A lot of people saw Jaws, they never went in the water again. I went out on Biscayne Bay sailing, I think the day after I saw Jaws 2, and I was swimming in the bay, and I looked up and, I don't know, 15 yards away from me, I saw this fin just go through the water like that and back under, and I was motivated. Turns out it was a dolphin. Which is a pleasant surprise. But many people suspect that only the Christ was able to walk on water, and I'm here to tell you, if you're sufficiently scared, you have a pretty good chance of doing it as well. You move very fast. All right, I think that'll do it. I want to go home. We've been making great progress, by the way, on the Star Citizen thing. And we got a website up that we like. We're going to be sending our letters to the people that wrote us, it seems like 20 years ago. I only am saying this because I promised myself I would. I know this is a subject that a lot of people don't understand or don't get or just plain don't like. But just parenthetically, if you're one of those people that have never played computer games, what we need to make this thing work is we need accountants, lawyers, anybody with intelligence background, certainly anybody who was a shooter, anybody who was actually, certainly an operator would be priceless, because we got to train people up. But we're not creating a fighting clan or a fighter squadron. We're not creating a corporation, a shipping corporation. We're creating an entire nation. And for us to succeed, we have to have the real-world experience brought into the game. So if you've got a background in accounting or finance or something like that, and you want to become Secretary of the Treasury for the Aurora Republic, then, hey, we certainly could use you. So it's not, we'd love it if you again, just send it to info@billwhittle.com with Star Citizen in the text. Sarge says, let's do the next show as an all-movie show. Sure, why not? That'd be fun. It'd be fun to talk about a couple of movies and just how they work. And I will hug Natasha for you guys. Thank you. Yeah, it'd be fun to take 5 or 6 movies or at least sequences and talk about why they work and how they work and just really break them down. I've got something I could show too. I think it was the first post I ever made on the new website, but it's very good. Very good example of the power of movies to make you believe things and see things and fear things and root for things with essentially no cues at all. You have no information, but you know this person's the bad guy. You know this person's the good guy. You become attached to this person. They've never said a word. And this is the art form. So yeah, it'd be a fun thing to do next week. If somebody can remind me, that'd be great. I hope I can remember on my own. And with that, I think we'll wrap up the Stratosphere Lounge episode number 167. Hooray! Thanks very much for joining us. I am so busy. I've got 3 or 4 full-time jobs to do. And I do the BillWhittle.com work as quickly as I can. Nice. Thank you for the warning, Cody. I understand. We're dealing with that too. And when I get done with the BillWhittle.com work I have for the day, I still have pretty much 2 full-time jobs to do to get this other stuff rolling. But if I didn't want to be doing this, I wouldn't be doing this. So that'll do it. Again, sincere thanks to our members and Jeffrey for signing up and anybody else who might have signed up. Thank you. It's not just needed, it's encouraging. So very good. Good to know. Thanks. We will be back next week, barring acts of God. And I probably shouldn't have said that because you never know when you jinx things. Yeah, it is time for Stratacon. Okay, guys, thanks very much for joining us. It's been great seeing you as always. It's been great getting the comments as always. Thanks again for our members, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.